Hello and welcome, everybody. I am glad to be here with my friend and colleague, Angel Mendez Montoya, to continue in our conversations here for St. Julian's on theology and food. My friend Angel is actually an expert in the area. I'll give a brief introduction and then I'd just love to get him started talking. Thanks for being here with us, Angel.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here, and hello, everyone.
Angel is zooming in from Cuernavaca, maybe outside of Cuernavaca, maybe, right, you're not right in the city, but.
Quite in the city, yes, we are very much in the center of the historic center of Cuernavaca, very close by.
I was there on a visit once right after an earthquake, so I couldn't see a lot of the historic center, but I know it's an amazing, beautiful city.
It is, yes. They call it the city of the eternal spring.
Wow. A place I'd like to be. We definitely don't get an eternal spring here in Austin.
I know, I live there.
Angel Mendez is a professor and researcher of arts, culture, and religion at Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. He oversees and works with colleagues and students on a program in arts and theology there. And he is the author of a forthcoming book called Theopoetics of the Body. And the subtitle is Dance, Philosophical Theology, and the Intermediations of the Body. So that is a book about theology and dance and embodiment. Angel, and also we'll come back to dance in a second, but also the author of a book on theology and food that's now out in a second edition in Spanish called Festín del Deseo hacia una teología alimentaria. And that is a feast of desire toward a theology of, I think, nourishment is maybe how I would translate it. Does that sound right? Alimentaria?
Yes, that's right. Yes, sometimes it's not a very common word, but more literally it will be alimentary theology.
Alimentary theology, which is not an elementary theology. Right?
Aliment, yes.
Angel also has spent a good bit of time in Austin. He has a Bachelor's of Arts in Dance from the University of Texas at Austin, and has spent a good bit of his life and career as a professional dancer. I've had the privilege of seeing Angel dance more than once. So Angel, thank you, welcome, and thanks for sharing some of your time here with us at St. Julian's.
I love it. I love to share with you, to be with you, and very glad for the invitation.
Let's talk about your the project on food. As I've explained to you, we are in the midst of a series of conversations about theology and food, both from the sort of the looking at scripture and then looking at practices of eating, and trying to draw some connections between the faith we profess and the foods that we take into our bodies and the habits of eating socially and personally. So for that reason, I really was excited about this conversation with you. You started a project many years ago on theology and food. Tell us a little bit about how you came to that, why that was something that you wanted to pour some time and energy into.
Yes, I think it started just before my PhD studies at University of Virginia, where I met you, and we became classmates. But before that, I had to think about a project for a dissertation. And at that time, I was a little bit like dissatisfied or unsatisfied with a lot of theology and philosophy around that. I found it very insipid and not very nourishing. And also, I wanted to do something on the body since I had a training as a dancer and choreographer. I thought that it was really important to think about the importance of the body, the relevance of the body when we are doing theology, that theology is not a disembodied project, but it's something that integrates the body. And I wasn't quite sure how to do it. And I felt at that time that I was also missing a lot of my culture in Mexico. As you probably know, many of you probably know that Mexico is very good on food and gastronomy. There are a lot of food traditions depending on the area, the geographical area. And food is a way of culture, is a way of being in the culture and a way of relating to other people in Mexico. And my father, my parents in general, but my father in particular, was an excellent cook, and he loved to cook on the weekends. And I think before hearing or listening about God or about the church, I think my first theological experience was through food, helping my parents to prepare food, and also serving the food and eating the food, and also opening hospitality to everyone really who wanted to come to the house and eat with us. And I think that was my first theological experience, because at that time there were not many things written both in theology and in philosophy. This was a PhD in philosophical theology, that there were not many things in these two areas on food. Most of the things were very negative, and also because of what was called at that time the hierarchy of the senses, this pyramid of the senses, where the most the most positive sense is the sense of sight, and then hearing, and then touching, and then smelling, and then at the very end, very low in this hierarchy, is the sense of taste. And it also in the theological tradition is very badly viewed because of the idea of the ingesting of the forbidden fruit, for instance, and how it got us out of paradise. So
I was just thinking, you even hear that in the like the idioms, some of the idioms that we have. Like, I see that. I mean, like I get it. That's true, and it's right there in front of me. But then when we talk about taste, it is more subjective. Well, it's not that it's true. It's just a taste that I have.
Yes, it's more like individual or personal.
Yeah.
And so I had to do a lot of interdisciplinary studies, and that's something that I love, because something about food, and I'm sure that this is right now for you as you are teaching this course at the seminary, and also for the people in the church as well, that food is a very complex thing. Is as soon as you start looking at food from one perspective, let's say from the nutritional perspective, you will learn that food is more than nutritional aspect. It's about commensality, so that means to eat together, or convivencia, as we said in Spanish, living with the other person, and the sense of having hospitality around the table. It is about the earth, it's about the planet. How are we treating ecology, the plants, the animals, all the things that we eat, but also water and air, everything that has to do with producing food, and also making food to travel to one place to another, etc. So it has to do with the planet, for good or for bad, mostly for bad, because we are also in a great ecological crisis, also related to food products and industry. And speaking about industry, it also has to do with politics as well, with economics. Who are in charge of distributing food? Who have food and who doesn't have food? Who goes hungry in the world? So we know that we have 831 million people or something like that malnourished right now in the world. And the great difference between people that have plenty and even they throw away tons of food, while other people in other places in the world are malnourished or dying of hunger.
One of the things that you say in the book, where you point out the etymological connection between sabor and saber. talk a little bit about that discovery, because I think it relates to what you were saying about the hierarchies of tasting, where hierarchies of the senses. So tell us a little bit about that connection that you found.
Sure, is sabor and saber, they come from the same root, which is sapere in Latin, which means to have a taste of things. And so to know things is to have a taste of things. And that's kind of a very early understanding of the word sapiencia, which is in Spanish is wisdom, whether that would be wisdom or sapiencia. And it's very interesting because usually when we talk about knowing things, as you just mentioned it before, it has to do with the sense of sight or even hearing. But in the early times, to know things was also meant to have a taste of things.
There's a kind of obviousness to it, the way that you lay it out in the book, because you talk about knowledge as something that we take into us. There's a kind of there's an intimacy when we know something, of taking it into our bodies, that's actually more like what we do than we eat. It's more like what we do when we eat than it is like what we do when we see. I can see something at a distance.
And be detached, so sort of detached somehow.
Yeah, that's right.
Although it is all the senses are bodily, and all the senses are relate to the sense of touch. So to see something is to touch and to be touched by something because of the waves
it's especially
in our eyes.
It's especially
when it's taste, exactly. It's more intimate. Yeah. Therefore is more emotional. It could also trigger some memories from your past, from something that you remember that you may have, that was a good sense of being with someone that you love, or in a great feast or banquet where you felt ecstatic and all that. And so the sense of taste is even more intimate because of the closeness to the object that you are getting to know. In this case, no, it's not getting to know in a sense of distance, but it's a knowledge that comes from intimacy. And I think that is a very theological aspect of food, because in Christian traditions, if God not only feeds us and is really attending all our hungers, but so not only gives us food as a gift, so that we don't die of hunger, but more radically, God becomes food in the New Testament. Then it means that God desires to be near us, to have intimacy with us. And so the ingesting of food in the Eucharist it represents the intimacy of God's desire to be near us, as well as humanity's desire to be near God and one another. And so really it's a feast of desire. It's a festín del deseo because of that, because it's the meeting of two desires, God's desire and humanity's desire. And so again, the sense of taste, the sapere, the knowledge that we acquire in the tasting of God, is a knowledge that has to do also with emotions, with affectivity, with love. Is we know through savoring God, through tasting God, the most intimate sense of being touched and touching God.
Yeah, we often think of it the other way, don't we? We often think first, see if you think God exists. And then if you think God exists, maybe get to know God a little bit.
Right. And I have experience, and I'm sure that a lot of people in church, they have experienced God outside of liturgical settings, and the table is one of them, and table fellowship and table friendships and love that you can create in around the table as well. Although right now is not so much of family's tradition to eat together, sometimes because of many reasons and fast food, and it's easier just to eat while you are doing business or looking at your internet or something like that. But how important it is to share the table among the people that you love. And that's another way in which you could also create community beyond the liturgical settings, in which there is a precedence to the Eucharist in the way we eat, in the way we share to one another. And so they are connected, really. And in the case of Catholicism, as I'm a Catholic, in Catholicism, there is sometimes a great gap between what takes place in the liturgical settings in the Eucharist, which is this great intimacy with God and with community. And then once you get out of the church, you forget about it, and there is no connection between this ingesting, communal ingesting of God present to us through food and nourishment, and then we don't make the connection in ourselves becoming nourishment for other people, and also protecting the planet, and also trying to demand justice as well, because labor, human labor, is also a great problem that is very political as well, related to food.
One of the things that I found myself fascinated by rereading your book this time was the way that you, this is not a quote, but this is sort of a paraphrase. I think it's one of your later chapters. You say that the one way of understanding what's that, like early Christianity, is that the church arises as a new way of eating. And I see it as like a connection of just what you're saying. It was this sense of what's happening ritually in the Eucharist is then what actually forms us as a people, that changes the way that we share, that we eat food, that we share food. And that maybe is one of the things that we've lost. That's the connection that you're talking about, that maybe we've lost. The new way of eating is just a ritualistic thing, and then we leave the ritual, and we just there's nothing particularly Christian about the way that we eat once we leave the Eucharist. Do you think that's?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I've seen both cases. On one extreme, I have seen churches where there is not really a connection with the Eucharistic practice and the liturgical practices and the world. So they make this big difference and gap between these two worlds, as if they are not really in contact with one another. But I, on the other hand, I also been a witness of other communities, Christian communities, Catholic communities, and also different Christian denomination communities that are very close to one another, and they are really a great example of community making and of God, because I think that's the main point of the Eucharist, is God that shares that self to the people, becoming food for everyone, so that we are called to become food for one another. And I have seen both cases. I mean, churches that are very disembodied, very disconnected with the world, and they really sometimes they don't care much about. They're very indifferent to the world. And other communities that I have seen a great testimony of table fellowship that goes on in not only in the churches with one another, where you can sense a great spirit of community in these communities, in these churches.
I had a friend recently remarked to me that there's a lack of there seems to be a lack of dietary laws in Christianity, especially if you compare it with halal principles of Islam or kosher laws in Judaism. And outside really the sort of the rhythm of feasting and fasting, it seems to be something that we lack. And it's got me thinking, like, especially when you're talking about connecting food to issues of hunger and justice, and farming to issues of climate change and all of that. I've started to get curious about that. Like, what if we developed a kind of Christian ethic around food that just became a kind of a natural habit for us as Christians to say, well, I can't eat that because of the devastating way that it was produced, or something like that.
Yes, the injustice that goes around sometimes is injustice towards the people that work in food products, and but also injustice against the ecology, against the planet as well. And so I think that we have to think very seriously if we are really Eucharistic people. I think that ecumenically speaking, we all being Christians, we are centered on the Eucharistic table on God that shares His love to us through the means of food and food sharing. And so, if that's the case, then we have to think very seriously what sort of connection do we make with the world around us. And sometimes it's just the way we relate in our own tables, the food that we go and buy at the supermarket, and getting to know what are the contents of the food, where it comes from. It is a good exercise sometimes to sit on the table, and when you have your food at the table, to try to imagine what happened for that food to come into your plate, what took place to get there. So you start going backwards until the moment in which it is collected or is transported, because transportation also can be a big problem with ecology and how we treat the air as well.
What you're saying about the complexities of table fellowship and the sort of the challenge of imagining all the all the steps that took place before food arrived on the plate reminds me of an experience you and I had years ago in Puebla, outside of Mexico City, when we went to a conference on mole.
Yes.
This I was tagging along. You were doing research. I was tagging along and enjoying myself with mole and tequila. But this ended up being a big part of the first chapter of your book, the story of mole. Why? Maybe as a final question here, just tell us why this was why did mole provide a particularly theologically interesting thing for you to contemplate?
Okay, just before that, just apologize for all the sounds outdoors. But yes, it's well, first of all, because it's a very national a Mexican dish that is very important to talk about culture. And what is interesting about this dish, or this recipe, is that it comes from the pre-Columbian culture. So it is before Christianity, and then it got Christianized or baptized by Christianity when we had the Spaniards and the Portuguese coming to these lands in Latin America. And so it mixes both traditions, culinary traditions from the pre-Columbian times, that it was very sensitive about food and the way food was a way of relating to the gods, and also to Christianity, that the Eucharist is so central. And so it was really an interesting blending of tradition and mestizaje of traditions. And so because of that, I found that it was very exotic and very extravagant dish to explore these complexities of this dish. Also because of the complexity of all the spices and all the ingredients that it has. The mole that I learned how to make, and it's a recipe in the book, is it has 33 ingredients, and every family and every locality, different localities here in Mexico, they put their own traditional spice that is typical or it suggests that is some sort of identity from their family or from their country, from the state, or from their town where they are from. And also I think that was very important to think about theology, of how theology is also something that we follow some sort of a recipe, a tradition that is given to us, but we also put our own particular taste. So we co-create theology, and we co-create the church, a way of experiencing God as well in every locality. And because of that, I thought that it was interesting to make this comparison or analogy between the making of the Mexican mole, that is very complex, that it follows tradition, but at the same time innovates. There is innovation with new ways of involving or getting involved all the community and the individuals. And to connect that with the way we do theology now, that is also following traditions, different traditions, and being faithful to that, but at the same time bringing more spices with different contexts in which we are living right now. And that happens in the church as well, that we are trying to preserve the tradition that was given to us, but at the same time we are innovating because we are co-creating the church in current times. And then in the future there will be next generations, hopefully, that they will continue with our traditions, but as well innovating with new ways of understanding God in different times and in different contexts.
That's a beautiful.
And so that is a mole in itself. The church is like a making of mole in that sense, I guess.
I love it. It makes me think, sometimes I have said to students, nobody has ever lived the Christian life the way that you are living it now. Because there's, you are in a sense, we're following traditions, we're following scripture, we're following that recipe. But this is, this is a moment, and I am embodied in a moment in a way that no one ever has been. And so there's a kind of spice, there's a kind of a particularity to the flavor.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
I think that's a beautiful way a beautiful analogy to think about what the Christian life is. It's following a recipe, but it's doing it with it's doing it with co-creativity.
Co-creativity, yes. I think this is very important, and we have to follow our imagination and be able to make community with one another, so that we can create together and co-create together with what has given to us this gift of being in the church, but also being able as a community to give ourselves so that other people can be nourished as well, and that when they come to the church they feel nourishment and they don't feel a sense of indifference.
Yeah, isn't it? That's the key. Angel, thank you so much for your time. By the way, I didn't even get to comment. You're in such a more beautiful space than I am. I'm like here behind a backpack with dinosaurs, and you're in this like amazing, lovely room with.
Well, everyone is welcome here in my house. Mi casa es tu casa, and hopefully you will come one day.
I can't wait. I'll be back to visit someday. Thank you so much for the time that you've given us, and I know you've given us a lot to think about today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.